She was 7 the last time she saw her mother. There was no goodbye, no note, just the wind in the fields and silence. 30 years later, Claire returns to the house she swore she'd never enter again. And in the floorboards, behind a stair, she finds it, a journal, wrapped in linen, her mother's handwriting still alive on the first page. If you're reading this, I didn't leave because I wanted to. What happened to Eleanor Whitmore in the summer of 1980? Why did no one speak up? And what secret did her husband bury in the walls of that house? Because sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. It waits to be found. There was something about the way the wind moved through the fields behind the Whitmore house in Missoula, Montana. It wasn't loud or even forceful. It was soft, like fingers brushing along the tops of wheat that no longer grew. But Claire could swear she still heard them. The same soft whispers that used to reach her bedroom window at night. The same sound that made her mother pause mid-sentence and glance toward the trees behind the barn. It had been 30 years since her mother, and still the house had not changed. The same gravel driveway, long and curved like a question mark, stretched from the main road to the front porch. The same weathered rocking chair sat motionless beside the entrance, its wooden arms dry and cracked by years of rain and winter. And the same rusted wind chime hung above the door, its metal tubes tangled, mute, as if afraid to sing without the woman who once loved their... Claire hadn't stepped foot inside since she was 7. And yet now, with the key cold in her hand, she turned the lock like she'd done it yesterday. The door creaked open. The air inside had a stillness to it. Not the sterile kind of emptiness, but something thicker, like memories sealed inside. A faint trace of lilac, her mother's perfume, still lived in the hallway. Faded now, but unmistakable. Each step Claire took echoed faintly on the hardwood. Her fingers grazed the old wallpaper, patterned with yellow roses, now curling at the corners. Dust hung in sunbeams like the remains of a dream no one had dared to wake from. The living room remained frozen in time. The same green armchair where her father once read the newspaper. The same porcelain lamp with a crack that Claire caused when she was 5. The television, bulky and square, stared silently from the corner like it knew too much. And there, above the mantel, still framed in worn oak, was the photo. Her mother, Eleanor Whitmore, hair the color of autumn leaves, smile faint but kind, and eyes that always seemed to be watching something just beyond the camera. Claire stood in front of it, heart thudding. 30 years of silence couldn't erase the feeling that this house remembered things no one else dared to. Outside, the trees whispered again. The furnace clicked in the basement, the same way it used to in the winter, when Eleanor would hum while making tea in the kitchen. A sound so ordinary, so harmless. And yet today it sent a chill through Claire's spine. She closed her eyes. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Like the house had waited for her, and she had waited long enough. It had taken her 6 months to finally return, 6 months since her father's death. 6 months of estate paperwork, court signatures, and mailed keys in thick envelopes that smelled like dust and grease. Frank Whitmore had died of a stroke, alone just like he'd lived the last 30 years. He never spoke of Eleanor, never answered questions, and Claire, for most of her life, had stopped asking. But now, standing here, it felt like the walls were asking her. She moved through the kitchen. Everything was still where it used to be. The spice rack, labeled in her mother's handwriting, a faded calendar from 1980, still pinned to the side of the refrigerator, its last marked day, June 3rd, with a red circle around it. Claire's stomach tightened. That was the day Eleanor disappeared. No note, no suitcase missing, no sign of forced entry, just gone. As if the house had swallowed her whole. Back then, the police concluded she left on her own. Rumors said she ran off with another man. Others whispered she had a breakdown. A few thought maybe Frank had something to do with it. but there was never proof. No body, no witness. Claire had only been 7, old enough to remember her mother's voice, but too young to understand silence that deep. And now, the silence was all she climbed the stairs to her childhood room. Each step creaked with memory. Her old door was still painted lavender. The faded sticker of a butterfly still clung to the handle. Inside, bookshelves full of forgotten paperbacks, a single stuffed bear on the bed, and the window, the one her mother used to sit by, reading, watching storms roll in from the hills. Springs groaned beneath her, and then, almost instinctively, she reached under the mat. Nothing. She opened the closet. Empty. Then she turned to the old dresser. Top drawer, clothes from another life. Middle drawer, empty. Bottom drawer, stuck. She pulled. It gave way suddenly, and something slid forward, a rectangle, wrapped in a thin linen cloth. Claire stared. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. It was a journal, leather-bound, brown, worn at the edges, no title, no lock. She opened the cover. Inside, in looping cursive that sent her heart into her throat, "To my daughter Claire, if you're reading this, I didn't leave because I wanted to." Claire Whitmore never told anyone about the dreams. She'd had them since she was 8, always the same, a field, the wind, her mother's voice, faint and distant, calling her name, and a red ribbon caught in the grass. She never saw her mother's face in those dreams, only the back of her figure walking just beyond the wheat. Every time Claire ran after her, she woke up. She stopped telling therapists after college, stopped trying to explain it to boyfriends, and definitely stopped bringing it up to her father, who shut the subject down with a cold look and a gritted jaw. But in the privacy of her own mind, the dream stayed. And now, standing in the same house where those dreams were born, Claire could feel them pressing against the inside of her skull like waves against a dam. Claire was 37 now. A librarian at the University of Montana, she lived in a modest apartment in downtown Missoula, a few blocks from the library where she worked. Books had always been her refuge. Safe, predictable, understandable, unlike people. She had never married, not for lack of opportunity, but because trust never came easy. There was always a layer missing between her and other people, like a pane of glass. They laughed, loved, confessed, and Claire smiled. But part of her was always somewhere else, somewhere silent and unfinished. She had dated a man named Paul for 3 years, a high school English teacher, gentle, warm, with the kind of smile that made people feel instantly seen, but even Paul got tired of the locked door in Claire's heart. "You're kind," he said once, "but you're always somewhere I can't reach." They broke up on a Tuesday. She didn't cry, not then. Her days were quiet, structured. She woke at 6, coffee, a jog along the river when weather allowed. She took the same route, past the same oak trees, waved at the same man walking his old Labrador. At work by 8. The university library smelled like dust, a combination Claire found oddly comforting. Her desk overlooked the northern lawn where students passed in waves, headphones on, backpacks slung lazily over one shoulder. She spent hours cataloging old texts, answering questions no one else wanted to deal with, and shelving titles alphabetically because it made sense. But beneath the routine, there was always a quiet ache, like a page missing from the middle of a book. Her childhood was mostly a blur. She remembered colors, smells, flashes of emotion, but not details. The clearest memory? June 3, 1980, the smell of burnt toast, her mother humming in the kitchen, the sound of a screen door slamming, her father's voice yelling something she didn't understand. And then silence. Hours of it, until night fell and no one had found Eleanor. Claire remembered sitting on the steps outside the house, waiting, holding her mother's scarf, watching fireflies, and realizing slowly that no one was coming back for her. Her father had changed after that. Frank Whitmore had always been stern, but something hardened in him after Eleanor disappeared. He stopped speaking to neighbors, stopped smiling, installed a lock on his study door, became quieter, colder, a man of routines and unspoken rules. He never raised his hand to Claire. But the house grew heavy with a kind of tension that made her walk on tiptoes even as a teenager. Whenever she asked about her mother, he'd say, "She left. That's all you need to know." And that was the end of it. By the time Claire turned 16, she had a plan. Leave Missoula, never look back. But something always pulled her back. The house had been left to her in the will, no other family, no instructions. Just a legal envelope with her name and a key. And now, in the quiet of the upstairs hallway, with the journal clutched in her hand, Clara felt 17 again, small, scared, and full of questions. She brought the journal to her sat cross-legged on the floor, page 1. To my daughter Claire, if you're reading this, I didn't leave because I wanted to. The handwriting was shaky, faded in parts, but undeniably her mother's. Claire ran her fingers over the ink, like it could bring the voice back. She turned the page. I'm afraid. I don't know who to trust. But I need to write this down somewhere. I need someone to remember what really happened. Claire swallowed. She felt something shift inside her, like a string pulled too tight for too long had just snapped. For the first time in years she felt something, a flicker, a flame. And behind that flicker, one question burned. What happened to my mother? Claire sat in silence for a long time. The journal rested on her lap, its leather soft from age, its weight heavier than any book she'd ever held. It was a key. She could feel it. A key not to a lock, but to a story buried in dust, denial, and decades of silence. She flipped carefully through the next few pages. Most were short entries, some barely a sentence. June 1st, 1980. He came to the back door again. This time he knocked. June 2nd. Frank doesn't know I saw the note. I put it under the floorboard. Second stair. June 3rd. If anything happens to me, it started with that man in the brown jacket. Claire blinked. She reread the last line over and over. She looked up at the old wooden floor. The stairs. Second stair? It was nearly midnight when Claire crept into the hall, flashlight in hand. The house was dead quiet. No wind, no cars, just the distant hum of a refrigerator from the kitchen. She stopped at the second stair from the bottom. It looked like all the others. A little more worn, perhaps? But normal. She crouched down, ran her fingers along the edge. There, a seam, just slightly raised. She pried gently with a butter knife from the kitchen. It gave way with a soft crack. Inside was a folded piece of yellowed paper. She unfolded it with care. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. He watches from the trees. If he talks to Frank again, I'll have to run. No name, no date. But it was her mother's writing. Again. Claire sat there for a long time, heart racing. Morning came with a soft drizzle that tapped against the window panes like fingers trying to get in. Claire hadn't slept. Not really. Instead, she spent the early hours revisiting every room in the house, searching for more. She checked under drawers, behind picture frames, inside books, and in the basement. She hadn't planned to go down there yet, but the journal had mentioned the furnace, and that sound from the night before. The basement smelled of old wood, rust, and mold. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, casting shaky shadows on the concrete floor. Claire stepped slowly, flashlight in hand. Cobwebs clung to the corners. Boxes of holiday decorations and forgotten tools lined the shelves. The furnace sat heavy and still in the far wall, an iron beast with chipped paint and dust-covered dials. Claire crouched beside it, nothing unusual, until she noticed a small panel at its base, screwed shut. She found a screwdriver in the toolbox nearby and began loosening the screws. Inside, something was taped to the metal, a photo. She pulled it out carefully. It was a black and white photograph, slightly curled at the edges. Her mother, standing outside the house, looking over her shoulder, and in the background, half concealed by trees, a man in a brown jacket, face turned, almost invisible. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She checked the back. In faint pencil, April 1980. Who took the photo? Later that day, Claire drove into town. She hadn't been back in years, but everything felt eerily familiar. The diner, the gas station, the old post office. She parked near the courthouse and walked to the library archives. Missoula's newspaper, the Sentinel, had been running since the 1940s. She signed in as a researcher and requested editions from April to June of 1980. The microfilm reader clicked and whirred as she scanned. Headlines flashed by. April 10th, local girl wins art contest. April 14th, unidentified man seen near River Park. No foul play suspected. April 22nd, police investigate break-in at Miller Farm. Claire paused. That second headline. She pulled it up. A short article buried on page 4. Local residents have reported sightings of an unidentified man in a brown jacket near River Park, described as tall, thin, and quiet. Police state there is no cause for concern at this time. Claire circled it. That night she sat in the kitchen, staring at the journal and She spread out a piece of paper and began making a timeline. April, photo taken, man spotted. May, journal entries become more anxious. June 3rd, Eleanor disappears. June 4th, police report filed by... Why would her mother hide notes and a photo if she was planning to run away? Why did no one mention the man again? And why had Frank never told her about any of this? Claire decided to call someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Aaron Kelly, her childhood best friend. They lost touch after high school. Claire had moved away. Aaron had stayed in Missoula, working as a nurse. The phone rang 3 times. Then a familiar voice, older but unmistakable. "Claire?" They met at a small cafe off Higgins Avenue. It was raining again, the kind of steady drizzle that turned the sidewalk slick and quieted the city. Erin looked surprised but warm. Her red curls were shorter now, her nurse's badge still clipped to her jacket. They hugged briefly, awkwardly. "You look the same," Erin said. "You don't?" Claire replied. They both laughed just a little. Over coffee, Claire explained what she'd found. Erin listened, eyes widening. "I always thought something was off," she said. "Your mom wasn't the type to just leave." Claire leaned in. "You remember anything strange back then? Anyone around the house?" Erin thought for a moment. "There was that man. Came by the school once. Said he was doing some kind of survey. Brown jacket. I remember because he asked where you lived." Claire froze. "Did you tell him?" "I was 9. I thought he was a teacher." Claire walked home in the rain. The photo, the journal, the article. It was adding up. She entered the house. And that's when she noticed something new. A footprint. Damp. In the hallway. Hadn't been wearing shoes. Claire didn't move. The wet footprint sat in the hallway like a question, slightly smeared, left by a shoe larger than her own. She turned off the lamp, heart racing. The house was still. Too still. She reached for the drawer in the kitchen, where her father had kept a flashlight and an old hunting knife. The drawer groaned as it opened. The knife was gone. She stared into the darkness. Then a floorboard creaked upstairs. Claire backed toward the front door. She moved slowly, silently, hand trembling as it wrapped around her phone. She didn't dial 911. She called Erin. It rang once. Twice. "Claire?" Erin's voice came through, breathless. "I think someone's in the house." Police arrived 12 minutes later. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no one upstairs, no footprints outside. Claire showed them the journal, the note under the stair, the photograph. The officer, a man in his early 30s with a polite but detached demeanor, took notes, said he'd file a report, and left. The next morning, Claire received a call from the Missoula County Sheriff's Department. A detective wanted to meet. Detective Leo Harmon was in his mid-40s, denim jacket over a tucked-in shirt, and a cautious way of looking at people. He met Claire at the station, laid out her mother's file, yellowed, stapled, thin. "Not much here," he said. "Couple interviews, one photo, no body, no witnesses." He leaned back in his chair. "But you said you found something?" Claire handed over the photo and the journal. Harmon's eyes scanned the pages slowly. His brow furrowed. "I've seen this handwriting before." Claire blinked. "What do you mean?" He stood, walked to a filing cabinet, flipped through folders, and pulled one out. This case, Miller Farm break-in, April 1980. He slid a photo across the table. It was of a shed door, and on it, scratched faintly into the wood, "He watches from the trees." The same sentence, same handwriting. Claire's hands trembled. They drove together to the Miller Farm, now abandoned. Tall grass swallowed most of the property. The shed still stood, weathered and leaning. Inside, dust-blanketed rusted tools and rotting wood. Claire walked slowly, flashlight in hand. In the back corner, buried beneath a pile of rotted tarps, they found a metal box. Inside, letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to Eleanor Whitmore. None were mailed. Harmon read one aloud. "I know you saw me. I didn't want to scare you, but Frank is lying. He lied before. He'll lie again. If you want the truth, meet me by the old railroad bridge." No date, no signature. Claire's head swam. Who was this man? How did he know her mother? What did he mean about Frank? That night, Claire sat alone on the porch of the old house, the letters in her lap, the journal beside her. Rain had stopped. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. She opened the journal again. June 2nd. "I saw him again. Same jacket, same spot near the field. I know what Frank did. I think he knows I know." Claire read it over and over. She barely noticed the figure walking up the drive. It was Helen Drake, the elderly woman who had lived next door for decades. White hair in a bun, sweater too big for her frame. Claire hadn't spoken to her in years. "I saw the lights on," Helen said softly. "Figured you might want some tea." They sat together in the kitchen, the kettle whistling. Helen's hands shook slightly as she poured. "I still think about your mother," she said. "She used to bring me soup when I was sick." All was asked about my dogs. Claire nodded. "Do you remember anything strange from that time?" Helen's eyes grew distant. "There was a man," she whispered. "He used to walk the woods behind your house. Never spoke. Just watched. Gave me chills. Did you ever tell anyone? Your father said he'd take care of it. Told me not to talk about it." Claire stared. "And you listened?" Helen's hands folded in her lap. "We were scared of him, Claire. After your mother disappeared, no one wanted to ask questions." Later that night, Claire returned to the journal. She turned to the last written page. It read, "I left something for you. If you ever find this, look beneath the floor in the barn, under the blue tarp. Left corner. I couldn't bury it any deeper." The next morning, Claire and Detective Harmon drove to the barn. It creaked open like a yawning mouth, smelled of hay and mold and time. They found the blue tarp under broken planks. Claire knelt down, pulled it aside. Beneath it, partially wrapped in plastic, was a duffel bag. Inside, a blood-stained sweater, the one her mother wore in the photo, a cassette tape in a plastic case, a wallet. Inside, a driver's license, name Caleb Rowan, the man in the jacket. Claire stepped back, heart pounding. Harmon picked up the cassette. "No label," he said, "but I've got a player at the station." They drove back in silence. At the station, Harmon slid the tape into an old recorder. A faint hiss. Then a voice, male, nervous. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm dead, mate, or close. My name is Caleb Rowan. I didn't hurt Eleanor. I tried to help her, but Frank found out. He knows about the bridge. He knows about the file. Static. He was a cop. He could make things disappear. Don't trust the file in the station. It's not complete. The real one. I hit it. The tape cut out. Claire's hand shook. Her blood's on that sweater, Harmon said. But if what he's saying is true, Claire whispered, then my father lied about everything. The truth was never buried. It was boxed, filed, locked away, and Frank Whitmore held the key. The morning after discovering the tape, Claire barely slept. The name Caleb Rowan echoed in her head like an unfinished sentence. She searched county records, old police archives, online obituaries. Nothing. No missing person report, no death certificate, no arrest. Just one mention, a transfer request filed in 1979 by Officer Frank Whitmore to reassign sensitive documents related to Rowan inquiry. She printed it, brought it to Detective Harmon. He stared at the paper for a long time. I knew your dad, he said. Didn't like questions, kept everything close to the chest. You think he killed him? I don't know what to think. That afternoon, Harmon took her to the record sub-basement of the sheriff's department, a place few visited anymore. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Filing cabinets lined the walls, drawers labeled with years long past. They searched for over an hour, and then at the back, in a drawer marked Archived, 1979-1981, Harmon found a folder. It wasn't labeled. Inside, a single black and white photo. A young Eleanor Whitmore standing in front of a police car. Face bruised, arms crossed. Written on the back, Victim Statement, May 17, 1980. Officer present, F. Whitmore. Claire's hands trembled. She flipped through the folder again. One sheet was stuck to the back. A statement form. Most of it redacted, but one line remained. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt Claire. Claire's breath caught. Her father? They returned to the house. Claire climbed into the attic alone. Among the dust and cobwebs, she found an old suitcase, one she remembered from childhood. Inside, letters. Dozens, all from Caleb. Some were never opened. Others had notes scribbled on them in Eleanor's hand. He wants me to run, but I'm scared. Frank knows. What kind of man uses his badge to bury the truth? And one, if Claire ever finds this, tell her never stop trying. Claire cried for the first time in years, not just because of the loss, but because she'd spent decades protecting the memory of a man who had erased her mother. Harmon met her downstairs. I checked something else, he said. That bridge Caleb mentioned, the old railway line, it was condemned in 1981. Still standing? Barely. They drove there at sunset. The bridge sat quiet over a shallow ravine, surrounded by trees that swallowed the light. Underneath, buried beneath a loose plank, they found a rusted metal lockbox. Inside, a badge. Officer F. Whitmore. Polaroids of Eleanor. Her arms bruised, face swollen. Audio tape labeled Interview E.W. A handwritten confession. Claire read it. Her father's handwriting. Careful. Measured. I told her to stop seeing him. She wouldn't. Said he was helping her leave me. Said she had proof. I didn't mean to hit her that hard. She ran. I panicked. I made it look like she left. I burned the clothes, buried the notes, moved the body. Claire couldn't breathe. They found Eleanor's remains 2 days later, buried near the tree line behind the barn, just beyond the wheat field from Claire's dreams. Wrapped in the same blue tarp with a red ribbon knotted around her wrist. The case hit the news. The town reeled. An officer, a father, a murderer, no charges were filed. Frank Whitmore was dead. But the truth had finally surfaced. Claire stood at her mother's graveside a week later. The tombstone read, Eleanor Whitmore, loving mother, silenced too soon. Aaron stood beside her. So did Harmon. So did Helen. Claire placed something on the grave, her mother's journal, wrapped in linen. Sealed forever. That night, back in the house, she sat by the window. The wind moved through the fields again. But this time the whispers weren't frightening. They were familiar. The letter was real. Claire turned it over in her hands again and again. Faded edges, yellowed paper, postmarked October 1981. Return to sender, C. Rowan. Address unreadable. She opened it. Inside, a single sheet, handwritten, shaking. Eleanor, if you get this, please know I didn't leave. Frank threatened me. Said he'd call me a stalker, an addict, worse. I backed off. I thought he'd let you go. I thought if I disappeared, he'd stop. But I never stopped watching. I stayed near. I waited for a sign. I'm sorry I failed you. See. Claire's breath hitched. Harmon traced the letter's journey. The return address had been a P.O. box in Spokane, long closed, no forwarding, no signature required. Rowan had vanished, legally and literally, but he'd tried. And that changed everything. A week passed. Claire stayed in the house, not because she wanted to, but because it felt wrong to leave in the middle of goodbye. She cleaned every room, boxed her childhood books, donated her father's things, burned the rest. She found the red ribbon again in the garden, buried under spring leaves, tied to the base of an old iron fence. Eleanor used to braid Claire's hair with it. The last time she saw her mother, she had tied it into a loose bow. Claire sat on the porch steps, ribbon in hand, watching the wheat sway in the wind. The air smelled of lilac and rain. Erin visited daily. She brought soup, tea, a blanket her mother had sewn decades ago. They talked like they hadn't since they were girls. Erin cried once, telling Claire, "You didn't just find your mother, you gave her a voice." Claire didn't know what to say. Maybe there wasn't anything to say. Helen, the neighbor, left a note on Claire's front step. It read, "We failed her. I failed you. I'm sorry. If I had spoken up, then maybe she'd still be here. I hope one day you'll forgive us." Claire didn't respond, but she placed the note inside the journal. Detective Harmon filed the final report. It would be classified as solved. Posthumous confession. The department wouldn't pursue charges, but they would issue an official apology to Claire, to Eleanor. A ceremony was planned for the following month, a plaque, a bench. A small park near the woods behind the house, where Eleanor once walked with Claire in her arms. Claire stood alone at the site the morning of the installation. No cameras, no speeches, just her. She wore her mother's sweater, clean now, whole. The bench was made of cedar, etched into the back. Eleanor Whitmore, she mattered. She still does. Claire traced the letters with her fingers. Then she sat. The wind blew gently through the trees. Birds chirped. Light filtered through green branches. A squirrel darted through the brush. It was peaceful, like the place had waited. Weeks later, Claire packed the final box. The house echoed around her. Every room had been scrubbed, cleared, aired out. Only the living room remained. And the fireplace mantel, where her mother's photo still stood. Claire lifted the frame, turned it over. Taped to the back was a note she hadn't seen before. Small, fragile, her mother's handwriting. If the world tries to silence you, write louder. If the truth is buried, dig. If you feel alone, you're not. You're my voice now. Love, Mom. Claire pressed the note to her heart. She didn't cry. She exhaled. She donated the house to a local shelter for women. Let this be a place of safety, she'd made her. Let it give someone the voice mine lost. Then she left. She moved to Portland, took a job at a small bookstore. A quieter life, but fuller. She started writing essays, articles, a memoir. People read her words. They cried. They remembered. They asked questions. They listened. One spring morning, Claire received a letter, no return address. Inside, a single Polaroid. A man standing beside a tree, older, gray-haired, holding a red ribbon. On the back, it read, "She would be proud. See." Claire smiled. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. It began with the wind, that soft brushing sound that moved through the wheat fields like breath, like memory. Now, 30 years later, the sound was the same, but Claire was not. She stood alone by the porch of a house that no longer belonged to her. The sun was setting over Missoula, spilling gold across the fields where her childhood ended. In her hands she held the last thing she would leave behind, not the original. That one rested beside Eleanor forever, but a faithful copy, with her own notes in the margins, clarifications, additions, closure. She placed it in the mailbox at the local library, addressed to Local History Archives, Whitmore Case, 1980. Let it be recorded. Let the silence end. Claire walked slowly through the grass, past the oak tree where her mother used to hang wind chimes made of seashells. She stopped at the fence line. The wheat field beyond moved like a... She remembered her dream again, the woman walking just ahead, the red ribbon, the voice calling her name. But this time she didn't chase it. She stood still. She listened, and in the quiet she heard something new, not a whisper, a laugh, her mother's laugh, carried on wind and memory and time. She closed her eyes, let the breeze pass over her skin, and smiled. Aaron would call later that night, asking if she made it back to Portland safely. Harmon would send an email, just checking in. Helen would send a card in spring with a drawing of a red ribbon and a single word, brave. Claire's life would never be simple, but it would be hers. She would write, she would speak. And every time someone asked her what happened in Missoula in 1980, she'd tell them the truth didn't vanish. It waited. She returned one last time, years later. The park was complete now. The bench still faced the woods. Children played nearby. The plaque remained. She sat again, older, softer. Holding a copy of her book, a young girl approached, curly hair, curious eyes. "Are you the lady who found her?" Nodded. The girl smiled. "My mom read me your story. She said you're a hero." "What?" "I'm just a daughter," she said, "who finally listened." The girl ran back to her mother. Claire watched them walk away hand in hand. And once again, the wind moved through the trees, the same way it did that night. The same way it always had. But now, finally, it didn't sound like morning. It sounded like peace. Before leaving, Claire walked to the edge of the woods. She knelt, dug a shallow hole, and placed one final object into the earth, her own journal, wrapped in linen. On the first page, in her handwriting, "If you're reading this, it means the silence didn't win. It means the story was heard. It means she was never truly gone. Claire Whitmore." She stood, brushed off the dirt, and walked away, not because she was finished, but because she was finally free. And as the wind carried her footsteps into the field, it whispered the truth that had waited 30 years to be spoken. She was never lost. She was just waiting for someone to come find her.